Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Benet Weiser. I'm the Dean of the Annenberg School, and I am so happy to welcome all of you to this very special evening where we get to celebrate our own Joe Turow. Yay! It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be able to honor Joe, your incredible career and your indelible impact at the Annenberg School for Communication. I thought about how to do this. Should it be a roast? Because that would be so easy. And then I thought maybe I would just tap into my creative side and just do a kind of cataloging of all the bad and the every once in a while good puns that he would make in faculty meetings and just string them together as a narrative, but I decided not to do that. It's lovely to see colleagues and friends and students and family and staff here, all of you testimony to Joe's presence here at Penn and at Annenberg over many decades. So I'm just going to give a couple of minutes of kind of listing of Professor Joe Turow's accolades so you all know. He is the Robert Louis Sheehan Professor of Media Systems and Industries at the Annenberg School for Communication. Let me tell you just a few ways in which Joe has been recognized. He currently serves on the editorial boards of the Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media, the International Journal of Communication, and Media Industries. He served, as most of us here know, as Annenberg's Associate Dean for Graduate Studies for 10 years. He was an elected chair of the Mass Communication Division of the International Communication Association. He's also an elected fellow of the ICA and was presented with a Distinguished Scholar Award by the National Communication Association. These are some of my favorite tidbits. A 2005 New York Times Magazine referred to Joe as, quote, probably the reigning academic expert on media fragmentation. In 2010, the New York Times called him, this is my absolute favorite, the ranking wise man on some thorny new media and marketing topics. So from now on, if you could just refer to Joe as the ranking wise man, that would be great. In 2012, the Trust Internet Privacy Management Organization designated him as a privacy pioneer for his research and writing on marketing and digital privacy. He's authored 12 books, edited 5, written more than 160 articles on mass media industries. His book, Playing Doctor, Television, Storytelling, and Medical Power, won the 2013 McGovern Health Communication Award from the University of Texas College of Communication. His most recent books are The Voice Catchers, 2021, and The Isles Have Eyes, 2017, and the introductory textbook Media Today, Mass Communication in a Converging World, which is in its 8th edition and is used in many colleges and universities. He is currently working on a 9th edition of the text, as well as on a project for the University of Chicago Press that examines Sellers' technologies of social division, from peddlers' community maps to ad agencies' forays into predictive and generative artificial intelligence. His books have been translated into Chinese, Spanish, Korean, Turkish, and Serbian. Joe's 10 national surveys of the American public on issues relating to marketing, new media, and society have received a great deal of attention in the popular press, including 9 full-length New York Times articles, as well as in the broader research community. He's been interviewed widely about his research, from NPR's Fresh Air with Terry Gross to The Atlantic to the BBC, CBS News, and others. He's written about the media for the popular press, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, American Demographics, Washington Post. His research has received financial support. He's testified in congressional hearings, lectured to congressional staffers, and participated actively in several class action lawsuits against the data surveillance activities of such firms as Google, Amazon, Clear, Vizio, and Marriott. And I think that deserves an applause. So just a couple of words about why Joe has been so visible in the popular and academic presses. His research has made incredible interventions into the field of communication and media. He has persuasively demonstrated throughout all of his work the various ways in which power dynamics shape cultural materials. And by that, he has an expansive definition of what materials are, from books to TV shows, to radio talk shows, to local TV news, to commercial messages, to supermarket aisles, and to voice assistants. These are the ways through which people learn about the world, and Joe has tracked them, indexed them, and documented them for us. His research also engages representative national surveys to explore Americans' understanding of and opinions about marketers' uses of data about them. And I want to just end with just a bit of a personal reflection. Years ago, many years ago, when I was an assistant professor at the other Annenberg School at the University of Southern California, I began doing research on the children's cable television channel Nickelodeon. My interest in Nickelodeon began, like pretty much all of my research, with my children, using them as little social experiments to figure out what it is that's interesting about them, about these things. My two boys at the time were big Nickelodeon fans, and so I was watching a lot of it. Among other things, my research has engaged with national identity and cultural dynamics of power, and so I was interested in how Nickelodeon built their brand. Joe's work was a lifesaver for me. It was absolutely essential for my thinking in what then became a book about Nickelodeon. Your work on niche markets, media ownership, and cultural resonances of television pushed me to think in much more expansive ways about the media. Your work was indispensable to that work, and so I wanted to thank you for that. At that time, I hadn't yet met Joe, though I did shortly after at one of our major conferences. He was immediately generous and interested and bolstered my confidence as a young media scholar. Several years later, I was invited here to Penn Annenberg to give a talk on what would become a book that I wrote about brand culture, Authentic. During the Q&A, those of you who know Joe will not be surprised by this. Joe asked me a fairly obscure question. But you know what? You didn't get me, right? Because I was able, if I do say so myself, to answer it brilliantly. And the reason I was able to answer it is because your work on history and consumer society shaped the direction of my thinking in ways that I wasn't even really conscious of. Several years after that, I came to Penn as part of the interview for my subsequent job as a joint Annenberg professor at the two Annenberg schools. A lasting memory of that trip was Joe taking me for a walk around Locust Walk and the Quad and College Hall, and stopping at College Hall in the Fisher Library and telling me the history of this and hearing the passion and the pride you had for everything that was Penn. It was such a warm and inviting walk, and it was really important to me, and it was a factor in my decision to come here. So if anyone is like questioning that, it's blame him. Blame him. Needless to say, Joe Turow has been a presence at some key moments in my career, and I am so grateful to you. And now I will turn it over to the guest of honor, Professor Joe Turow.
Thank you. That is an amazing introduction. I'm going to give a little 5 more minutes then. Okay. But that is so nice, and I didn't know about all this stuff, and you practically gave a lot of my talk also. But that is very kind. I'm going to try to, where's my talk? No, I'm going to try to give a very quick overview. I had a paper to thank people. Is that it?
Oh, I took your paper.
Well, I just wanted to, before I give a talk, I would have remembered, but I wanted to I only have 45 minutes, but I wanted to start by specifically thanking some people and generally thanking other people. I want to thank my wife, Judy. I could do far more in 45 minutes. No, I mean this. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. So before I do anything, I wanted to say that, because I know that you say I don't do enough of that stuff. Then I'd like to thank Annenberg's dean and faculty, past and present, for all the encouragement and collegiality. This is all true that I felt over the years. I'd like to thank my students, especially my PhD students who have been here, and it's amazing. People showed up. You know, I mean, they took their time out of their work and their families. Brooke came here from Cornell, Brooke Duffy, Nora Draper, University of New Hampshire, Emily Hahn, who's a media consultant from Media, Pennsylvania, which is, if you're a media consultant, it's good to be from media. And Lee McGuigan. Is Lee here? I haven't seen Lee. Lee, okay. Yeah, Lee is here from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Tom Nessinger was a master's student of mine. Also, Mike Serrazio is here from Boston College. So that's incredible that people came. And two students who were undergraduates of mine in Com 130, like 30 years ago. Stephanie Hughes from Marketplace, and she's now a moderator on Tech Marketplace, and Randy Michelle, who's a partner at First Artists, an agent, is up there. It's just incredible. So thank everybody. I really thank you guys for coming. I'd like to thank the staff. I know people do, but the staff is so important. And the word staff is a mundane word, right? But think about it. Moses used the staff to break the Red Sea. And if you think about that, the Annenberg staff would have done a much better job. I mean, Rich Cardona would have been talking about don't fish in the sea with a PH. And then Deb Porter would put signs up, don't walk on the rocks, and have mud around. So all that stuff could be, really helpful. But I digress. What I want to do for the time that I have left, and quickly, is emphasize some of the things that I've learned over the years in Annenberg, and maybe ideas that haven't been so mainstream in recent years. And I'd like to, it's called, I'm talking about 3 fundamental ideas: audience construction, institutional power, and the hidden curriculum. And what I want to do is talk about how I learned about this stuff from Annenberg, and also some of the ways that I've tried to advance some of these ideas. This is Bennett Hall. You probably know that. I'll go really fast. Bennett Hall is where I decided I didn't want to be an advertising copywriter. A woman that I had as a professor, Judith Federley, caught me. I left a copy of Ad Age in her seminar room, and she said, "Joseph, you want to go to advertising?" And it turns out she was a major feminist scholar, still is. And I decided that maybe she was right, particularly given that context. And through time that we don't have to discuss, I found out about the Annenberg School, which didn't have an undergraduate program at the time. And I talked to Larry Gross in 1971. He was, I think, head of graduate studies. This is what the Annenberg School looked like from the plaza entrance. And it didn't have anything underground. People went in through the plaza. Wait till you see what was across the street from Annenberg. That was across the street. There was Pagano's Italian restaurant. There was a drugstore. There was a cleaning shop. And down the way there was a bowling alley. And when it went out of business, I bought the bowling ball. Over there is what's now the economics building. You can see it on the end. It was a bank at the time. So when I came in, I started learning about media institutions. I had an interest anyway. But Charlie Wright was the person who taught pro-seminar, and he also taught a course in media sociology. And he asked the question when I was a first-year student, which I didn't really understand much. He said, "Are the media an institution?" That's what he asked. He didn't answer it, which was interesting. So I kind of kept wondering about that. On the other hand, the person I worked with in terms of my dissertation, George Gerbner, was very much understanding that media are collectively an institution. I mean, if you think about it, institutions are a collection of entities that have major influences on social life, like the medical institution, the legal institution, the educational institution. George realized that the dominant role that the media institution collectively plays is to shed light on other institutions. And he never put it quite that way, but I think that's what he was talking about. And that's a picture of Larry Gross back then, and Nancy Signorelli, and a guy named Mike Ely. And this is a VCR, if nobody's heard of it. And they were looking at television shows. He was doing stuff. So I learned about institutions from Charlie and George, but also Robert Louis Cheon. He's in the center there. He was a CBS radio producer for many years, a fascinating guy, interested in the history of media, did really interesting work till he got blacklisted. And he then worked for the Christian Science Monitor and the Saturday Review, wrote one of the first books on the history of television for children. And I also worked with Bill Melody. He was, I couldn't find a single picture of him online. It's just weird, he's still around. But he wrote a book on the history of children's television from an political economic standpoint, and that had a lot of influence. The idea of history became actually, I was always interested in it, became important. George pushed the idea of the hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum is the idea that underneath culture, there are patterns that are continually there, patterns that are in the content and patterns that are in the societal institutional activities that teach people about the world without being explicit about it. The term originated in educational sociology, but George sort of brought it into media studies. And he wrote this article called Teacher Image in the Hidden Curriculum, which was about that. It was an American scholar, the Pi Beta Kappa. And so what I did is I tried to deal with these issues. My master's thesis was kind of weird, but I think it was interesting. It was on the advising and ordering patterns between men and women in soap operas compared to evening dramas. And I was interested, it was a quantitative analysis which looked at who advises whom about what, men versus women. And the interesting thing, in the afternoon, women were the dominant audience, right? In the evening, it was mixed. And the question is, how does the idea of what men are supposed to be good at and women are supposed to be good at change depending on the shift in audience? So that's what I was trying to do with my dissertation. I mean, my master's thesis. My dissertation, I wanted to get to do something having to do with institutions, to get into an organization structure. So I looked at, and it's a long story why I chose the children's book industry, but I looked at two sections of the children's book industry. On the one hand, there were companies like Random House that made entertainment books for department stores and bookstores. And on the other side of the ledger in the industry, there were companies also making independent entertainment books for school and public libraries. And I was interested in, given the different client relationships between the two strains, how did that change what a kid was even, as I'll talk about later, and certainly how did it change the process of what a good book is? And it turned out to be very interesting. I interviewed people across book publishing companies, focusing on a couple, and I focused on the Philadelphia Free Library System and also a bookstore chain. Later, I got to look at diversity in children's television through a project for the Federal Communications Commission, which ended up being this book here. And it was a different take, both a quantitative and institutional take on the children's television industry. And through I got a job at Purdue University, and from 1976 through about 86 or so, I did a fair amount of work in Hollywood, looking at casting for TV parts. That's a really interesting topic. How do you get cast television shows I was looking at, particularly if they're small parts where it could be anybody. So essentially I was looking at what are the organizational bases for stereotypes, which worked back to my master's thesis, see? But this was an organizational take on it. And I interviewed and looked, I got into watching the production, but there was a whole chain of directors, producers, writers, and agents who were involved in this topic. And I did some work on local television. What does it mean to produce soft news and who gets involved in it? I did a study of what was called citizen feedback to mass media. In those days, people were saying, gee, it's great that people are writing letters to radio stations. It shows democracy at work. But what I showed looking at a radio station in Philadelphia, there was for reasons that you could talk about institutionally and in terms of interorganizational sociology, the company had a routine way of responding to these people. And I followed that, and then I wrote letters to them asking what they thought was going on. They thought the company was responding to their individual complaints and was dealing with them, while the company was basically keeping them away from anybody who could be possibly important. By the end of the 80s, I got interested in doing a larger topic relating to institutional power, because then I was teetering around, going around the edges. With playing doctor, I was interested in the interrelationship between the medical institution, could have been anything, but I chose the medical institution, and the media, particularly television, and looking at the history of a formula. How do you deal with the history? What happens when policy goes one way and the formula goes another way, which is what was happening? And I interviewed over 100 directors, actors, producers, writers, people in the industry, fascinating stuff. The oldest guy was a guy named Joe Cohen from the early Dr. Kildare movies of 1938. He was in his 90s when I talked to him. And really interesting people. So I wrote that, and then that was for Oxford. And then 20 years later, the University of Michigan Press asked me to update it. And I added like 150 pages. They didn't care. So then but what really stuck in my head about a lot of this stuff, particularly when I got back to Annenberg and I was far away from Hollywood and I got more and more interested in advertising again, I began to think of what happened when I looked at the children's book industry. More and more, what struck me of all things in my findings was how different people, the librarians on the one end and the book people on the other end, talked about children. And it all had to do with the client relationship. And the whole idea that audiences are a construct. I mean, it's not a brilliant notion, and of course people talk about social constructivism. But the idea that really what we have to talk about is not the audience as a thing, but audiences are constructed, and how are they constructed, for what purposes? And so I wrote the book Breaking of America partly because I was interested in the increasing emergence of target marketing in the United States, in the advertising industry in particular, and what might be some of the consequences of that. Now, a couple of years later, Cass Sunstein was talking about this from a very different standpoint. Sunstein sees it as people wanting to go to particular segmented areas. What I was arguing is that advertisers and media companies are purposefully segmenting out people in order to move them into those areas, and that has social consequences. And I was worried about the notion of segmentation and what does that do in the long run to a society, and it's a topic I'll raise in a few minutes. And so these other two books, the niche envy sort of picked up on that idea in the more, this was barely at the internet time, 96. So I think I mentioned the internet just a couple of pages. But by niche envy, it had become a major force. As I wrote more and got more into the topic, I got into the question of privacy. You almost can't deal with questions of how marketers begin to think about audiences and construct audiences without thinking about privacy. And the Daily U, the Owls Have Eyes, and the voice catchers are all about different ways of thinking about the institutional issues of privacy. The Daily U was about the beginning of a new form of media planning and buying in the advertising industry that was arising in the early 2000s. Owls Have Eyes was about how, in an interesting way, if anybody is interested, we'll talk later, how supermarkets and department stores began to say, hey, we got to do this stuff in physical space, not just online, to compete. And the voice catchers is really about the beginnings of biometrics and how, the person's voice and with smart speakers and other devices, and how do companies deal with that and move in a very different way. At the same time, I was fortunate enough to do, because of the Public Policy Center in the beginning and in other places, research on what people think about this stuff. And we got big media polling companies to do this for us. In the beginning, almost all of it was by phone. And then toward the end, nowadays people do it more online. And came to some really interesting conclusions about what people know and don't know and what their opinions are about this stuff. It really raised a lot of interesting questions, I think. Particularly when we got to the 2015 study that I did with Mike Hennessy and Nora Draper. And what we were trying to do is see whether this idea of the trade-off really works. Marketers keep saying the reason people give up their data is because of a logical trade-off. And we were saying, that doesn't make any sense, given our other previous research that we had. What we showed, and again, I can't go into in detail, we had scenarios that were in the study as well as opinions. We showed that what was really going on is what we called digital resignation. Essentially, to put it in the most brief sense, we gave people a question like, you'll have to, I think I'm remembering this right, I'd like to control the data the companies have about me online, and I've come to the conclusion that I can't control the data. And if people said yes, they agreed or agreed strongly to both of those things, they will resign, because resignation means you want something to happen, but it's not going to happen. And we found that in the beginning it was like 60%, close to 60% of people were resigned, of Americans. Then it came higher the next couple of times we did it. And what was interesting, other people began to do the same stuff in other countries. And many of them called it resignation, some of them called it digital futility, and it's sort of taken on a life of its own. Nora and I wrote an article for New Media and Society where we tried to broaden this idea into the sense that this was a corporate cultivation. And it gets back to the idea of the hidden curriculum. Because companies don't want people to feel bad about this. They don't want people to get angry. They'd rather get people resigned. And we tried to show how this works institutionally, a little like the citizen feedback article. And I'll talk a bit more about this. We also, Yif and I and Nora and a guy named Ari Waldman, who's a law professor at UC Irvine, did work on the idea of consent. You know, we showed if you give people 17 questions, and nobody has questioned whether our questions were good. I've never had a marketer say to me, you stacked the deck or anything like that. 50, most people, what was it, a huge percentage of people failed the test. It's like, and only 2 people got what we would call A minus. Sounds like my Com 1300. but the fact is that it's amazing how little people know about this stuff. So I began thinking in recent years, privacy is important, and I'm really worried about it. Particularly, I've done this work, as Sarah said, about class action suits. And if you read, I can't talk about this. Part of an issue we can talk about if anybody cares. The settlements require everybody to shut up, and nothing becomes public. So I can't talk about the stuff I've read. It's unbelievable. You know, the kinds of things, the memos that people write, and the things that basically say what we've been saying, frankly. Okay? But I began to worry that that's not the only way to think about what's going on here. That essentially the issue is also about social fragmentation. Getting back a little bit to the breaking up America thing. More and more you see how companies are breaking up society in so many, what marketers call hyper-segmented ways, hyper-personalized ways. And my argument is that you need, for a balanced, this is Dali, by the way, and me, for a balanced social system, society, you need a combination of segment making and society making media. Segment making are media that are for particular social segments, like for Catholics or for gays or for bus drivers, things like that. And then you need society making media where, in the best of all possible worlds, people can come together, those groups can come together, share their ideas, fight with each other, celebrate each other, that kind of thing. And the argument is, I used to believe that the problem was we just had too many segmented media, and it was hard. We've never had society making media in a serious way. I mean, you could say mass television was, but in a very sliced area of what it meant to be a society making media because of so much that was left out. But the idea here is that you need both, and I'm arguing that in our world today we're getting neither because of what's happening. Marketers are increasingly using technologies to industrially construct us in personalized ways that make a pro-social media system impossible. As I say, a pro-social media system is one where there's a balance between segment making and society making media. And so I say this focus on personalization isn't new. Personalization is not a new thing. It's not a fad that can be discouraged or easily regulated away. It lies at the heart, the historical heart of the practice of advertising. So for example, Tim Wu wrote a book called The Attention Merchants. Advertising is not just about attention. It's about personalization historically and engagement and conversion, not in the religious sense, but buying stuff. And my argument is you have to really understand the history of this if you want to understand what to do about it. The internet ramped up this personalization into a different plane, what I call the unending spiral of personalization. And it's fascinating. If you go back to the days of peddlers, okay, there aren't very many books about peddlers. But for example, here's this woman, Laurent Fontaine, wrote about Jean Eimer, a peddler in the 1700s. A French itinerant in the mid-18th century. He mapped out the landscape in his head, and it was this mental topography that provided him with his initial landmark. Each new client was first identified in relation to the position in his house. For example, in Mouche Pazy, the house above the farm yards. He would concentrate on situating his customers in social terms, within networks of relationships, family connections, and occupations. He noted down all these links in his notebook, along with any nicknames, how the customer was addressed in the village, and how they presented themselves during his conversations with them. One of the things they didn't want to do is get the networks wrong because they changed prices on different people. Okay? And so Kasia Diner talks about peddlers, foreign peddlers. Peddling forced new immigrants to become students of culture. A consumer's culture, the peddlers intuited, including details that translated into taste for clothing, jewelry, housewares, kitchen goods, furnishing. A consumer's culture also included the small gestures, cues, assorted elements of nonverbal communication that could spell the difference between a sale and a slammed door. This was 150, 200 years ago. And the history of advertising is not just the history of mass marketing. I would argue that's an anomaly. And underneath mass marketing was the direct marketing business, originally called direct mail, M-A-I-L. And the idea of that as secondary to mass marketing was a real interesting problem. What's happened now at the 2000s is the direct marketing and internet and display marketing are coming together on the internet. And advertisers realize that, but they don't dare call it direct marketing. Now they call it performance marketing because they don't want to connect with the old system. So you have an omni-channel hyper-personalization in an opt-in, opt-out world. Okay? The new thing is opt-in, and companies are trying to figure out how to do this, but it's really interesting. I can't go into all of this, but more and more companies are using predictive and generative AI to actually create the ads for individuals based on the information they have about them. It's not just websites and apps. It's email. For example, Victoria's Secret has been using artificial intelligence to figure out their customers and have the intelligence actually create different emails for each person with catalog-like photos, depending on the person. Streaming television, I'll talk about that more, but ads in streaming television are more and more personalized. RMNs, retail media networks, a relatively new phenomenon that, for example, Walmart doesn't just sell your presence in the store that you get ads and things on your phone. Now Walmart allows advertisers to go after Walmart customers in a whole panoply of media, including Vizio, which the TV set manufacturer that Walmart bought last year. Okay? So it's really an integrated system of personalization. Virtual influencers are in on this thing, where companies are actually creating influencers that can, using Gen AI, figure out what to say to any individual. Google Performance Max is the third iteration of a Google program that now uses artificial intelligence to iterate in, they say, millions of ways, different ads for different people, creating the ads and using all the information Google has about them. TeleTV is hilarious. This is a company that gives up, that straight out says, you know, you get ads anyway, why not get something out of it? So what they do is they want to give out 500,000 television sets. Now they've gone into the thousands. And when you do this, they give you a TV set. Underneath the regular TV set is a smaller TV bar on the bottom that constantly plays commercials. When you agree to be part of it, and they have to choose whether you're going to be in their sample, in their representation, you fill out pages of information about yourself, promise to let them follow you wherever you go, allow them to, and it just goes on and on and on. And with that, they are sending people individually created commercials. Now, I don't know whether this works or not. And to some extent, I don't care. In other words, they argue that it has influence. The more important thing from my standpoint is this is creating a system where individuals are getting very different ideas than other people about the world, increasingly. Now, if this is this is new, okay, so it's not as much as, if this is happening now, can you imagine what your grandkids are going to see? I mean, seriously, how is all of this going to work? Admirals, and I don't know if you've ever seen these things. Admiral is very interesting. The whole idea there is to stop people from putting ad blockers on their programs. So what they do, they have an artificial intelligence program that if they think that you're looking at something important, they will not allow you to see the thing at all, the website. If they think it's not that important and you haven't done it too often, they'll let you do it even if you don't want to give up your data. But if it's an important site that, given what they know about you, they think that you will really give up your data, they won't let you get in. And then you have to, they don't tell you they're going to use your data for advertising. They say, get rid of your blocker. Now, it's mostly now with sponsored messages. But technology exists as we speak to change news, entertainment, and information based on personalized construction. It's easy to make a show. It's expensive now to do it, but costs are going down, based upon who you are. Change the characters in the show. Change the headline of the news, and maybe even the news lead itself, depending on your political point of view. It's not a crazy thing to think that companies are going to do this. Why shouldn't they? And as I said, it's increasingly possible. There's an idea that you've put me on to called naive realism, which is the notion that a couple of Stanford professors have been showing through their experiments, that if you go into a situation and somehow you see that other people are not seeing the world the way you do, you get really anxious and annoyed. I would say that in the area of advertising, it may not be so much angry as discombobulated, a sense of not knowing exactly how to feel right about what's happening in society. So again, this is quick stuff, and I'm going to have to go through it. But the question is, how do you encourage both privacy and a balance between segment making and society making media? These are just, I don't think you can get rid of ads. Okay? I don't think you can get rid of totally of personalization. But I think you have to put this stuff in a historical perspective and try to understand it. That's what I try to do in the new book I just wrote. One, I say require that all companies' use of marketing data be opt-in. It's not a panacea, but it's a beginning. And if people don't want to read the privacy policy, which nobody does, and they are skeptical, they'll just not opt in. Don't allow firms to treat first-party data more leniently than third-party data, which today there is this sense of holiness about first-party data, which I think is misguided. Prohibit marketers from using third-party data providers. Those people are nasty, and I don't think they should be around. Require advertisers to post a T icon on every personalized ad, which when clicked will explain in detail the information the firm used to target the ad. And if, as in many cases so far, if it's generated by AI and is still a black box, they can't do it. Only if they can explain it should they be able to use it. I once had a guy tell me he didn't know what a soccer mom is. I'm a network executive. He said, our computers tell us they're soccer moms. Didn't know why, except maybe they go to soccer games, but that wasn't the only reason a person is a soccer mom. Make the trading of a person's location, for example, on programmatic exchanges, legal only on a case-by-case opt-in basis. Location's an interesting problem. If a person opts into location tracking, require marketers to make explicit when the tracking takes place by lighting up the phone and sending a text message. This happens much more often than we realize. Your position in life is constantly tracked and sold. And you probably get, when you go to an app, it says, can we use your location? Half of the time, the app doesn't use your location. They just want it because they want to sell it. Publishers, meaning like websites and apps, and advertisers should give people the right to try on identities. This may be a little bit weird, but I think that if you want to say, and certain times number of time a week, maybe you could do it. I want to be a 16-year-old white woman living in Iowa. And they should let me do this to see how does it look. You know, honestly, in terms of, people will begin to see how things work. You know, and they have to do it the right way or else they get in trouble. Now that's itself. These are only instigations. You know, it needs a lot of work to figure this out. Publishers and advertisers should give 1 day a week over to content without personalization. I know that sounds crazy, but can you imagine what that would mean? Would everybody would actually see some of the same stuff and argue about some of the same stuff? It would be very different from what we're used to, but it might instigate people to think about how they relate to other people. And of course, educate youngsters about the internet and marketing with the understanding that nowadays that knowledge is civic knowledge. I've taught this undergrad course for 40 years, 45 years, every year except 3 years. Bizarre, don't get me started. But the thing is that what I find, every year I ask these questions in the beginning of the semester, has anyone taken a class in high school about the internet? Maybe one person does, or two, and the ones who do, inevitably, it's because the school has a journalism class, and the only way that the school can legally control the journalism class in terms of censorship and stuff is if it runs the class, if it teaches it. So the journalism class and the journalism department of the school are sort of related. And but virtually nobody in the class has ever learned any of this stuff. They're great at it, you know, but they don't know the business behind the screen. And I think this has to stop. It's really kind of nuts. So implementing these activities will not be easy. The dynamics of institutional power, audience construction, and hidden curriculum are hard work with deep history buttressing them. In an era where splintering is the name of the game, marketers will resist. Even consumers may find themselves bewildered regarding the moves to bring people under wider cultural tents. It may feel strange not getting personalized answers and not seeing only the parts of the world they already know or want to know. For the sake of our communal future, though, we must confront the problems of personalization in an AI world and take the plunge to minimize them as much as possible. Thank you. That's Dali too. So I gave it credit. So I guess if anybody has a question, it's like.
Jeff.
Oh, Jeff.
Louisa, Jeff has it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for that. It was a really fascinating talk. And you tell a story about a kind of personalization in the peddler sense, giving way ultimately to another kind of fragmentation, omni-channel hyper-personalization, and with an interregnum of a kind of 20th century mass marketing. And yet there's this metaphor of the hidden curriculum from Gerbner running through a metaphor that comes out of the idea that there was a kind of storytelling that was a mass storytelling. Mm-hmm. Everyone saw the same thing. It was about the content. And you brought up the idea of the hidden curriculum when it came to resignation and the work you did with Nora on kind of the way in which facts and people might be unwilling to be unconcerned about the privacy concerns. But my question is around, what could it mean to have a hidden curriculum, this metaphor that was meaningful and resonant in Gerbner's era, in a moment in which there are
So,
so many different messages. And so what's the curriculum?
I think the curriculum is very different. It's not about, at least, there are many, many curriculum. But the one I'm focusing on is the idea that to get along in the 21st century, you have to give up your data. That's the hidden curriculum.
So where is the curriculum, though, given? Is it through media, or is it in some other way?
It's both. In other words, if you go, it's really hard in a lot of cases not to think you should be giving up your data. And we find this in resignation in general. People it's not like they want to do it, and it's not like they're totally non-resistant, but they're trying to figure out what they should do. And all around, the notion of give up your data is the way to go. I mean, it may not be, advertisers still say that we're doing this for your own sake. You'll really get something out of it if you give us your data. So constantly the refrain is, one way or another, give up your data. So I would argue that the hidden curriculum is that, at least one of the hidden curricula.
Thanks.
Lee, you're going to yell at me in some way or other.
No, I'm not.
Oh.
This is a softball.
Okay.
Can you speak to like the hidden curriculum that's the flip side of that within the industry of like not just you need to give up your data, but we need your data. Even though like I don't know what a soccer mom is. I don't really know how this algorithm works. I don't know how any of it goes. And yet there's like this underlying imperative that you got to do the business in a certain way.
Yeah, I think that's part of how the hidden curriculum comes about. But you're right, that's the dynamic within the industry. And as you've called it, what was the term you used? Something cynical resignation. That they've basically realized it has to be done, and they got to do it. And they ignore our research, frankly, and they find their own research that says that people want this stuff.
So then do you think as a point of intervention you could try and break that cycle within the business logic, like amongst the professionals?
I think that I don't believe that you can tell them, we're going to break your logic. I think you have to say, structurally, we're going to change things. Yes, Bob? Now, I remember Bob Hornick asking me questions when I applied for a job. So this is a tough situation.
And you got the job, Joe.
I got a job, but what was something he said, can it be disproved, basically? Yeah, go ahead.
So here's something that can't be disproved. I'm having a little trouble. I love the talk you're giving. It's really exciting and fascinating. And I wonder whether two things, I guess there are two related thoughts I have. One is that by all this division, all this fragmentation, all this hyper-personalization, advertisers are giving up one of the major influences on purchases, which is that other people like you, other people around you have purchased it. So the natural social contagion of purchasing gets undermined by the hyper-personalization, so that Victor is not buying the same thing I am because he's getting a different message than I am.
Well, they may buy the same thing for different reasons.
And that's where I want to go next,
Yeah.
which is even though he's getting a different story than I am,
Yeah.
we're both buying Coca-Cola.
Well, that's true.
And that's and maybe that's the hidden curriculum. Buy.
Oh, it's always the hidden curriculum. But I
not
do
so
think
hidden,
that there's a difference if you're approaching the world in one way or another way. In other words, that you may end up with the same purchase for different reasons with a different view of the world.
Who cares?
They don't care. But from a sociological perspective, I would care. In other words, people are coming at the world and they're being influenced for different reasons. The idea of what characteristics are valued is what I'm talking about. Some people are valued for certain characteristics, others are valued for other characteristics, and that valuation is used in different ways. Now, you're right. Nobody wants to sell just one product to one person. But the idea is that the person should be, the advertising should be focused on that person's characteristics. Because it's not just the product that you're selling an idea of what's important in the world. And that is different. The way it's presented is different.
So we're not both getting the same message of
No.
who's powerful and who's not powerful in the world.
Oh, I don't know about a Gerbnerian perspective,
Exactly.
but yeah, I don't care about that part. It's more.
Always did, Joe.
No. It's more about what is important. How do you think of yourself in relationship to other people? And how,
Power, who doesn't have power?
well, value. I would say the word value, but maybe it's the same thing. I saw a scowl on Carolyn's face.
Well, that's because I think I might not understand what you said.
Okay.
But, so I'm curious about how all this interacts with news.
Okay.
You know, because you said you want people to get out of their silos and encounter things that might not make them comfortable. And every time I read the New York Times, I'm not very comfortable. You know, so in terms of society making media, what's the balance here between journalism and advertising?
I'm not sure of the question.
Okay.
In other words, it's what I'm saying is that advertising can be personalized, but so can news be personalized in the purpose of advertising. In other words, if I find that you like optimistic, and this is not a make-believe example, if you like optimistic headlines and somebody else likes pessimistic headlines, I will show you optimistic headlines most of the time, and that will affect the way you see it around you. The advertising is seen as a context around which to place the messages, and the context is considered important.
Is that what the New York Times is doing?
No. Right now, they're using artificial intelligence to query the readers of different articles and come up with generalizations about them in order to sell it, in order to create, to permutate different ads for them. But they're not using it to create different articles in the news area or different headlines. They may create different front pages. You may see a different front page than I based upon personalization. So when you go to the NewYorkTimes.com, you may see a different page set up. But right now they don't do it. I understand they're looking into more artificial intelligence with respect to news creation. How far they'll go with that, I have no idea.
Okay, and I just have one more question. I never look at the ads when I read the news.
Okay.
So
Well,
am I subject to the hidden curriculum?
I don't know. I mean, first of all, ads are not ads are not ads. All right, there are ads that are the display ads that nobody looks at. It's called the banner blindness. Okay. Then there are other ads that you may not realize that you see, but they're there. The video ads. People do look at these things, and the click rate is minuscule. Okay. There's far less than 1% of the ads that are shown on Google get clicked, but there are billions of ads. So even if 1%, Google makes a lot of money. The idea that a person would see the ad and not click still exists. And of course, they do get a lot of people click to buy things and that kind of stuff. Ads are also branded content. You know, people will read articles that are created, say, by the New York Times has a special division to create articles for advertisers, which they then highlight as, you know, basically created for IBM, for example. Forbes has it too, and it sometimes shows up on search without. Sometimes it tells you where it's and sometimes it doesn't tell you that it's a branded thing. So there's a lot of. I don't think we should say that just because we're like this, other people are, you know. But enough people look at the ads to make, and supermarkets, okay? Millions of people travel through supermarkets all the time. Supermarkets have found it incredibly important to send different ads to different people as they walk through the aisles. And people will turn on their apps, and other companies will have other apps, it's a long story, to actually send ads to you as you're walking through the aisle. If they think you're pregnant or they know you're pregnant, they'll give you a discount on diapers if Procter & Gamble's involved in it. And this goes on every day. Go into Target, and you know, if you have your Target app open, as a lot of people do, this personalization happens all the time. So advertising has to be looked at in a very broad sense. Influencers are the same way. Stephanie.
More questions, Sarah?
Oh, all right. Okay.
Thanks, Joe. I think I have a question that's very related to Carolyn's question, and you may or may not want to skip me, which is fine. No, once you
Why
get the
would
question.
I ever skip you, Sarah?
But I wondered about how much some of these ideas that you talked about today align with political contexts in particular. And so when you were talking about people being sort of resigned to the fact that they have to give away their data, which I would interpret as sort of giving away their power to corporations. And when you were also talking about the work you did with YIF, where people reacted quite poorly and maybe agitationally to discovering that their way of seeing the world and the content they were being promoted was different than others.
Oh, no, that was just research I was quoting.
Right, but I couldn't help but think that this sounds familiar in our contemporary political environment, that people are receiving different information and different news about politics, and whether or not a particular executive order is good or bad will depend on which website they go to and which network they. And so I guess I wonder, my question is, do you see an alignment between the strategies that advertising industry has used now for 100 years and the shift in the strategies our politicians and sort of political parties? There's
always been an interconnection between marketing, consumer marketing, political marketing. And everything you mentioned is exactly right. The thing about it is, and it's easy for me to stay here and say this, but I genuinely believe it. This is just the beginning. I mean, if you have to think, we're in 1890 with the beginning of the sort of marketing apparatus of late 19th century into the 20th century. This is small potatoes. And the kinds of things that we'll be seeing using artificial, predictive, and generative AI, this is just the beginning. That's why I worry about the next generation, the one after that. I don't know what it's going to be like. It'll be fascinating to try to see if I'm ever around. But that's why I'm retiring, right? But the thing is that it is something that if you talk to people in the industry and see what they want to do, what they really would like to do moving forward, and they can't do now, it really is an extension of this in fascinating ways. And I have found that when people say things, like if you spoke to people in the year 1990 about what cable television would look like, they would say now everybody's going to buy Rachel's sweater. When they watch Seinfeld, the idea, it was the goal of advertisers, where if you liked Rachel's sweater, you could click on it. And it didn't happen for like 20 years. Now you could do it if you want. It takes far longer, and you need far more cultural change than we would expect. But we still have to be aware that there is an internal industrial logic that is moving in this direction. That's why I say it's historical. It's not just simply there. It's something that's going on. Sorry, I got major moments. Thank you.
Joe, I wasn't hurrying you off. I was feeling very self-conscious about the fact that I had Rachel's haircut, and now I know that I've been manipulated by, the television industry. That was an amazing trajectory, amazing history. We are going to miss you, but you must still come around and I look forward to seeing you in the halls and at faculty meetings and giving us your puns and your wisdom. And there's still a reception upstairs for the next half an hour or so. So please, can everyone just give Joe Turow a huge, huge